Okay, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, guys, wherever you're watching from. Welcome to today's class. So, I would say if you're here, please go ahead and drop a message on the Discord server so that we get others to join in. It promises to be a wonderful session. We already have Bobby on the call. I don't think I have to introduce Bobby. He took us earlier today, so he's back to continue more on view. So, Bobby, over to you.
Hi, Amaka. Good evening. And hi, everyone. I hope you all have a lovely day. I did. Um, I guess it's time to get back to what we started. Um, we've been looking at Vue, an introduction to it, and we are basically going to go into some more details about Vue this evening. We'll be looking at the Vue ref, reactive syntax, Vue methods, Vue computed functions, and Vue watchers. Um, we were able to introduce the whole concept of Vue, what it is. It's a framework, it's open source, managed by a team of people who are actually doing a wonderful job, if you ask me. We were able to see the kind of APIs that Vue is made up of, the options API, which basically makes you configure your templates with sort of like options that are listed out, and the composition API that lets you more programmatically, configure your templates. We were able to look a little bit about the environment of Vue and how to basically set up a project in the command line interface. Um, let's move on from there. Let's see what the Vue reference is like. The view refs. So the view refs, they provide a way to access a particular document object model element or an instance of a component in a particular template. We already know what a template is in Vue. The template is basically the area in your Vue documents that lets you impute HTML codes, basically, which is the foundation of every web document. So these view refs help you access those specific elements. They give you a means of getting access to them to modify or make modifications to those elements in the way that best suits whatsoever project or application that you're working on. This is especially useful when you need to access underlying DOM elements or components that are rendered in the templates. So rendering in the template basically means how Vue is able to, do all the necessary configurations and then display it to the user within the browser. So when you need to specifically do some work on specific elements, and you want to make some certain configurations to certain elements, you use the view refs to access those elements and perform your configurations on them. uh, just as a way of example, we'll look at a snippet of code, just a snippet, not necessarily running, just to see what the view ref looks like. Let me take you to my interface, my visual code. So this is what a view ref looks like. I don't know, Amaka, can you see the character as well? Amaka, can you hear me? Please, can anyone hear me at all? Let me let me get a yes
Okay, I
in the
can hear you, Poppy.
comments. Oh, okay, okay. Sorry. Can you see my editor properly?
Yeah, but please, can you increase the font a bit, please?
Oh, okay. Is this better? Okay. I believe
Okay,
this
this
is
is
better.
better.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yes,
So
this is better.
this is what a ref looks like. uh, the ref helps us in this snippet of code. We basically have an input tag and a button HTML tag here, and inside of the input tag there is a ref keyword that is being used to reference the input tag. Now that reference can now be accessed within our options API here, and we can from here make configurations to it. In this case, we are saying that each time that we place our cursor within the options API, that it should focus on it. So basically, what you need to take from this is that this is the way you could reference a specific element in view and make changes to them. Using the this keyword, you're basically telling it that within this particular function or this object, there is a reference, there's a referenced element in that document. I'm making changes, and the particular referenced element is the input reference. And then this is this function I want to perform on it. So you can perform various tasks on using the reference keyword, and it's awesome when you get to understand them better. Uh, just so we could cover more ground, let's go to the next thing on the slide. We have view reactive syntax. So what reactive syntax is to us is it's used to create components that can react to changes in data, and to create components that can update themselves automatically when data changes. So just like the word react means, it means when you're able to respond to something as a result of a given cause. Uh, Reactive syntax is like that, based on certain events or certain changes within your view documents. It reacts to it. So view allows you, code it in such a way that it can respond to changes while they occur, and as a result other actions could be carried out. So it's a concept in view that really makes it quite dynamic, and it's a feature that a lot of view projects carries, that makes it much more friendly for users. This is basically the aspect of view that makes you look at the web as more of an application than just a page or a clean site. This brings out the dynamic nature of your code base. So the view reactive syntax is a set of syntax and patterns used to create reactive components in a Vue.js application. It helps to manage and update the real time in real time without having to manually update the DOM. So you are not manually making changes every time. You are basically just setting up a couple of syntax or code. A syntax is basically the way you implement the thing, and because it is a core part of Vue, reactivity is a core part of Vue. It provides a syntax in which we are able to implement dynamic changes within our code base, based on other specific data changes that occur. So that's a concept that will be used a lot whenever you are using Vue.js. An example, let's just quickly go into, so that we could look at a snippet and what it looks like. So this is what reactive syntax is like. This We talked about directives in the previous class we had, and we said that a directive is basically prefixed with the letter V. Now, we have a couple of directives in Vue that help us, programmatically, influence things that are happening within our templates, which is basically our HTML documents, or our HTML elements within the Vue documents rather. So in this case, we are using a V4, and definitely I told you about the documentations, and you would see more of these directives there and how to use them. But this is an example of a Vue directive, and it's called a V4. This is basically running a for loop inside of your HTML document. So there are instances where you would want to run through probably an array of data that is being gotten from, in this case, like an API. This is a mock API. It doesn't really exist. I didn't have enough time to link it up to an actual API so that we could like experiment with this. But I'll try my best to make you understand what is going on here. Anyway, so sometimes you might need to access. Let's say you are actually trying to fetch data from your back end. I used an instance of a user's data in the first class we had in the daytime. So let's say we want to actually fetch uh, data from the back end. Because of the nature of Vue and its reactive nature, there is a function. This is part of the functions that we could access within Vue. It's called the created function. What basically this means is when you create the HTML document in the browser, this is the first set of actions that I want you to perform. And in this case, it is trying to access the API. So what happens is immediately your browser loads and it has mounted it has created the HTML document within your browser. Immediately that happens, even before anything is rendered in front, it makes a call to the API. This would give it that speed it needs. That you understand how that is a reactive, it is reacting to what is happening within your browser. So the moment it is loaded into the browser, it's the moment the DOM is created in the browser, it immediately runs a fetch. So before all the components appear, it will probably have received whatever data that it is supposed to display. And then using this view directive, the v4, we are able to look through all those data and render them on the document object model for the users to see. So this is just a simple example. And in this case, what they are running through is probably like a list of names. Uh, and they are printing it out using a v4 statement, which is basically running a loop through an array of data. So like you can see, we are using two options here because this is an option API pattern of implementing the Vue.js file. We are using the data, which is supposed to hold the variable. Like I said, Vue is based on the model view model architecture. Means would have representation of actual models within our Vue document. And in this case, items is representing an array of documents that will be retrieved from the model, which is back end in the back end. Now, what is helping us get those items is this reactive function here, which is which is triggered when the HTML document is created in the browser. The moment it is created in the browser, it runs a fetch function, which you already know in JavaScript is a way of making API calls. And this is the link that it is making the fetch through. It returns it as a promise, and as it gets that, the response is basically attached to the data here, of which this data is binded to the items here, and then it is printed out for the users to see. So this is what reactivity is all about. The ability for Vue to observe and act accordingly in order to make the application a lot more dynamic. It is a very strong plus to be able to build applications using such a concept. Uh, Previously, when building applications, it's a lot more difficult to have this fluid nature of being able to handle both your reactive syntax and your templates in the same document. It was a lot more complex and ambiguous when using, regular vanilla JS and your HTML and your CSS. You would have issues, going here and there, trying to structure them properly. But what Vue attempted to do is building a framework around that makes it easy for you to access everything that you're working on in the same document. So by doing this, I don't need to create an extra document and go and look for ways of processing it and placing it to the templates, which I am binding it directly in the same document, and it's reacting to basically the browser itself. And we'll talk more about some of all these functions as we go, because there are lots of them that really makes that dynamic nature of Vue come alive. Let's keep going. So from this, you could see the application would use reactive syntax to update the lists, and the API returns a new set of items. And the reactive syntax would look something like what we just saw in that example. So that's just a snippet of what reactivity looks like in Vue. So talking about view methods, we've seen an example of view methods. So view methods are just basically functions when you look at it from a JavaScript perspective. But eh, the functions are, let's say, they are tuned to help view a lot more, dynamic and a lot more reactive. And we'll see a couple of those functions as we go. I would literally take you to the documentation so you see how it works. But this is just what the job of the function is, of the methods are. So it's for updating data, it's for performing calculations, it is for manipulating the DOM. Some examples of this include event handlers and lifecycle hooks and more. So from this lifecycle hooks, I would want you to know a little more about that. So let me go. So I am in the Vue documentation right now. I introduce you to what this, the value that this has to offer to you as a developer. It would help you understand the Vue framework even much better. Now, one very important thing that you would have to take advantage of in one way or the other when using Vue.js is the life cycle. This life cycle um, methods, and this diagram is here to make you understand exactly how the Vue lifecycle works. So you could see it said below is a diagram for the instance lifecycle. So you don't really need to fully understand this. You see, the developers of the framework have told you that it's not important for you to fully understand the inner workings of it. All you need to know is what value it poses to your application. And the moment you're able to understand that, there are incredible things you could build with it. So, but each time you keep working on it, you would be able to get conversant with it. So this is a flowchart that explains how the life cycle works. Now, from the beginning, you could see that the renderer encounters a component. So what that basically means is your website is loaded, your server has sent your Vue.js, your rendered Vue.js to the client end, and your browser is beginning to interpret it. That is when it is rendering it. What happens is, first of all, it accesses the composition API, for instance. It checks for all the necessary configurations within your code. In this case, it's an option API we're using here. Let's see. So it comes to this place and looks at this, the entire script, and sees all the necessary configurations that are there. Sorry. You could see it checks for the data, it checks for any bits of functions that are within it, the methods, it checks for everything when it loads it to the browser. And then when it does that, it checks if there are any functions that are there before it is created. So this is a function that is executed before the component is created. Now let me still go back to my code base and show you an example of how that would look. So when you are implementing this in your, when you're implementing lifecycle hooks to your code base, you implement them as options, either in the option API, or you implement them as functions within your composition API. Not like by the plain functions anyway, because your composition API already recognizes this. So you could see this is what happens before the document object model is fully created. You can see in the flowchart, it's first would execute whatever function is found within its block before it creates that object. Then it initializes, and this happens within the composition API. Now, it now comes to see the options API if you are using an options API, because there are cases where you could combine both your composition and your options API. Now, this is before creates. Now, after option create, the options API is read through or initialized. It now checks the created function, which is, you could see this. Now, anything within this place is executed. Let me check that example we checked before now, which was under reactivity. Yes, this. You could see that this is before the document object model is fully created. It would run this API call and fetch the data, because obviously the data that it fetches from the API is going to be needed when the document object model is fully formed. So it is important that that function runs before that the object model is built. So that is what makes it quite important and, interestingly dynamic. So that's an example of the created function. Now we could further go to, it checks after it has compiled the templates. This is a, I don't know how many of us are conversant with a flowchart, but the diamond shape means it's sort of like an if else if situation. If it is positive, it goes down. If it is not positive, which is if your negative, your answer is negative, which is if you get a no to whatever question that is placed within the your program flow, it then comes down here to compile it. But if it is pre-compiled, it goes straight down. Now the next lifecycle hook you see is the before you mount. Now, before you mount, it's being created doesn't necessarily mean it has been mounted. It has been created, it means your JavaScript engine has been able to, work on it and produce whatever thing needs to be produced. But it's being mounted means it is displayed for the users to see. So this is before it mounts. These are things that happens, functions that would be executed before it mounts. Coming down, you see the initial render to create and insert the DOM. Now it's beginning to initially do the necessary things to prepare your browser's page to display those things that needs to be visible to the users. And then after it prepares it, it mounts it. You see, so the lifecycle hooks has a lot of areas, a lot of periods that it checks that you could react to basically and perform different functions. You have before it updates. That is, if there's a need to update the element. So let's say there is a change that was made to a specific area after it has mounted, then it will have to call the update function. So before it updates, you could perform a series of actions or logic at the options API end or your composition API end, and you can see after it's updated, there's still a bit of actions you can create. Now, when it is about to be removed, which is unmounting it, there are actions you can perform, and when it has been removed, there are also actions you can perform. So, learning how to or when all these specific lifecycle hooks occurs is very, very relevant um, to you as a developer or as a view engineer. Let's move forward from here, please. So we have the view computed function. We talked a bit about this earlier on today. The computed function, they are only executed as a reaction to an event that requires a specific data to be manipulated in the DOM. The view components, computed functions are special functions that allow you to define a property that is based on results of a function. So they can react to a particular data that is being changed, and they can change a specific data on the DOM. You see, these functions are cached based on their dependencies and would only re-evaluate when a reactive dependency is changed. So basically, what this means is that computing functions are mostly cached in memory. Means uh, when they perform whatsoever thing that they whatsoever logic that they are supposed to, it is temporarily stored just in case it needs to be reached again. Now, an advantage of a computed function over a regular function is that uh, it is since it is cached, it is not the entire functions within the computed function that is executed. It is only those that the data has been changed that is executed again when need arises. So this means that the function would only be called if one of its reactive dependencies has changed, which is what I just explained now. And the results will be cached. So when it does that, it catches the results again. I think I should have a code snippet that describes that a little. Here's an example of what it looks like here. So we have a paragraph here, a paragraph tag, a p tag here, and we have a result here. You see, oh, sorry, this isn't supposed to be here. Now, this this paragraph is hooked onto the data within the computed uh, options. Now, the results here are only computed when these values change. Although in this case it is declared as a data in our data options, but there are situations where this data could be hooked up to elements or tags that are within your template, and anytime it changes in value, it is going to call this computed function, and it has a lot of advantages it poses to your projects. We have the view watchers. The view watchers are like listeners for data changes in view applications. They detect when a reactive data property changes and then run a function that responds to that change. Now, the difference between a watcher and a computed function is simply this. A watcher basically watches the data within your view application, but a computed function is basically looking it's binded to a specific data. It is interested in one specific data, and it is changes that affect the data that triggers a computed function. But a watcher can be used to watch any bit of data within it basically listens to changes in data. So you could use watchers to observe a lot of things within your code base, and you and react to the changes of those things. So uh, when it observes those changes, the functions then responds to that change, and this allows developers to make applications more reactive and dynamic. So the view watchers are a feature on the Vue.js that allow you to perform reactive data binding. Reactive data binding means you can link up data that is within your template to a specific watcher, and it changes that data based on the reaction that that particular watcher function gets from whatsoever other data that it is listening to or watching. Watchers are essentially functions that are triggered whenever the value of a property is modified, and all these are just supposed to give you different angles to picture it better and understand it better. They can be used to perform complex calculations, updates the view with data from an external source, or even redirects the user to a different page. Watchers are essentially useful when you need to respond to changes in your data without having to manually update the view every time. So this is perhaps the most important thing you need to know about it. They are useful when you need to respond to changes in your data without having to manually update the view every time. So they are like automatic updaters of your document object model. They automatically they basically observe your code for changes in anything and automatically update the document object model to suit whatever changes are being made within the code base. And obviously you will find applications for that as you go. I would love to use an analogy to make us understand a little bit of all that I've talked about so far. So we have a house master, and I call this the house chore analogy. Give me a moment, please. So a house master will be leaving the house very soon, and he has a couple of workers that perform various duties when he's gone. Uh, the duties for those workers to perform include washing of the dishes, dusting of the furniture, sweeping of the house, and to cook two fresh meals, one with ingredients in the house and the other with ingredients purchased outside. Now let's see how this occurs. Now, a first servant, who refers to as servant zero, goes to the market. Immediately the house master leaves the house. The first servant goes to the market to go and purchase the ingredients required to cook the second meal. And now this is basically a function that is dependent on an outside resource. So that's more like an API. So when you are designing a code base that is dependent on something that is not within that code base itself, you are basically relying on an API. So this first servant is basically like he's basically a reactive code that is dependent on on returning value from a different source or a different code base, which is like an API. The second servant, or the servant one, washes all the dirty dishes in the house. Now, this is a regular method that is triggered when the master leaves the house. So it basically means that the DOM has loaded and this function is triggered. He begins to wash all the dishes. Now, the second servant begins to sweep the house, including the kitchen. You get. So when he sweeps the house, he sweeps everywhere and he ensures everywhere is clean and kept. Now, the third one, he dusts all the furnitures. So the fourth one is meant to watch the servants, the first servant, which is the second servant rather, which is the one washing the dishes, till he finishes the dishes before he can cook the meal. Because obviously the kitchen needs to be cleared before you can cook a new meal. Now that is basically like a watcher. He's watching to see the change in data, which is the dishes. When those dishes change, he is now able to perform his own function that manipulates uh, um, the entire function base in or rather the entire code base in a different way. So the fourth servant is basically a watcher. He's watching to see what is happening, and then when that one is done, means when the data is changed, he's able to perform his own function as a result of the trigger that gave. Now, the second servant, who is or the servant two, who is the third servant, basically checks the entire house. You remember he was the one who was supposed to sweep the house, and now there's someone else who is dusting the house, who is the fourth servant, servant three in this case. The servant three, who is dusting the furnitures, would obviously make a mess on some certain places after the second servant has swept the house. So he is waiting to see areas now that have dirt on it again. Now he's binded to a specific data, which is the dirt on the floor, so that he can be triggered to sweep it again if it gets dirty. So that is like the job of a computed function. So he is observing to see anytime there is a change to that specific data, which is the flaws, and then he's triggered again to sweep it. Now there is a fourth servant, the fourth servant rather, which is the one who is meant to cook the dish. Remember how he's supposed to cook two dishes. Now he cooks the first one. That is because the data, the things he requires to cook the dish is within the kitchen there. But there's a second meal that he needs to cook that is dependent on data that will be retrieved from the market, which is basically like an API call. So the moment that first servant, which is servant zero, gets back from the market with the ingredients, he has to cook again. So that is basically just reactivity. as a syntax. He's built to react to the return of the first servant in order to be able to prepare the second dish. So this is just to give you a basic idea of some of these functions and how it might affect real life objects around us. You see, so this analogy, the first servant represents a reactive syntax that in this case is dependent on an API call. The servants, the servants 1, 2, and 3 all act as methods that are run after the master leaves the house, which is just like when a page is loaded. So the master leaving the house is basically like a web page that just loaded. So, and the moment that page is loaded, these functions are called and they are executed. Uh, the servant 4 acts like a watcher, like I explained. He's always watching to observe, excuse me, sorry. He's watching to observe the different functions and then executes them. You understand? And servant 2 also acts like a computed function that waits for a servant where the room is dirty and sweeps that specific area that is affected. And servant 4 also is a reactive. He is reactive to the return of the ingredients from the first servant, which is the servant 0, and then he does the needful based on the data that is returned. So I hope this was able to explain in a little bit of detail what it all means. um, I don't know if there are questions that I could uh, I could take right now. Amaka, are you there with me? Are there questions?
Hi, Bobby. There are no questions, so you could go on.
Oh, okay. Let me look at a little bit of code, a small code base here. It is just a simple to-do list that makes use of some of this information that we talked about. Not necessarily all of them, but it's just some of them. Let me run it. Sorry, I think I might be running something else here. Okay. So in order for us to be able to run the code base like we talked about in the development mode, like we talked about it in the first class, we will run npm run. Oh, sorry, npm run serve and basically wait for it to fire up the server. So while it's doing that, let's just look a little bit into the to-do code base. So this is basically an app that runs like a to-do list where you're able to basically just input the tasks that you're supposed to do for the day and it saves it for you. Let's just go to the head. All right. So here we have the template area, which is the area that holds our HTML uh, uh, code code base, and it's inside of a container. It has a little bit of styling, basically like a regular HTML document. Here you could see a V model directive. This V model is what you use in binding data from your options API or composition API to elements within your HTML code base or your templates. You could see this is V model and it's called task. If we go into our scripts, we would find out that there is a data in the data option. There is a variable that is declared here that is called task. So this is basically holding an empty string for now because it is what we would use in holding the tasks that are imputed into uh, the input tag that is here. As you can see, it's an input stack. So whatever value we add into that, it is binded using the view model uh, uh, directive. Now moving down, uh, you could see that there is a button here. It's a submit button, and this at click here is basically an event that is being added to the button. So just like you would add an event to your regular HTML, in Vue.js, it gives you the ability to add events, and this is obviously a click event. And in order to be able to do that, you just need to put the at symbol with the event name, and inside here is the function that it is calling. Now, if I go down to my scripts, I would be able to see that particular function that is called there. So under methods, I could see deleted function, changes status. Sorry, all these are basically hidden right now. So you could see that particular event, submit task. That's the button here. It's the necessary logics that would make it perform the right logical work on the data that is being submitted is all written within the submit task, which is within the methods option here. And basically all these options are objects, as you could see. Coming back up here, there are a couple of other click events that you could see inside of it, because there are a couple of buttons inside the code base. Let's see if this has mounted, so it makes more sense to all of us. Okay, it has. So you could see this is what the code base looks like. I could basically just add a new task, take the top universe class for the evening. And when I submit it, it adds it to the list of things. And I could use click events to change the state from to do to in progress to finished. I could delete it or I could edit, and it's going to basically put it inside of this place. So all of these functions are within our options API. Let me take this out. All those functions are declared here. Change status, capitalize first character. Okay, this is just supposed to help us capitalize the first character when it is imputed, just in case it wasn't. It is to change the status, which is the buttons that when we click changes from finish to do to whatever other thing that's there. This is to delete a task. This is to edit a task, and this is to submit it. And all this is declared between the methods option, because they are not necessarily triggered by any individual thing on its own, like in the case of a computed data, or in the case of a watcher that looks at other functions in order to trigger itself. This one requires interactivity, so it waits for us to give it events by placing those click events and the rest of them to be able to make any of its adjustments or changes to the data in the DOM. So that's basically it. I don't know if there are questions, please. This is just a simple project, and we would not be able to obviously go through intense details right now. This is just to show you the capability of what you could do within a few JS projects. So please, if there are any other questions, I would want to hear them now. Are you with me, Amaka? Who am I? Who am I on? Amaka, can anyone hear me?
Hi, Bobby. I can hear you. Bobby, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay.
So do we have questions?
We just have one question here. Let me just put it up on your screen.
Okay. All right. Since is it possible to code this all from scratch to understand it better? Well, the time will not permit us to spend all of it here, but I could basically try to run through it. And by coding it all, you mean the to do sample. If that's the case, I can make the code base available to you, but I will try and explain it if you probably didn't get me better before. Is that okay?
I think that's fine.
Oh, okay. So let's see if I can just run through it line by line. That would be helpful, I guess. Um, so from the start, this is basically a HTML document. We at the first glance, you are just basically creating a normal HTML document. Now, HTML document and obviously a little bit of CSS, but the CSS is not just here. There's a little bit of CSS down here. So a Vue.js is made up of three parts. It's made up of the template, which is your HTML document. It's made up of the script, which is obviously your JavaScript, and then it's made up of the style, which is all the necessary styles that are used to style the HTML or templates documents above. Now, whenever you see these scopes here, it means that the CSS within this place is specifically for just the template. Now, in a situation where we import another component into this, if it is not scoped, the CSS within this place would affect all the child components that are attached to it. So for us to restrict the CSS design within this place to the template that is assigned to it or attached to it, we need to place the keyword scoped in front of the style. So that's it. This is just basically to give us the basic feel and look that we have on the documents, uh, or basically just styling the HTML templates here. Now, moving forward from that, I don't need to start explaining what a H2 tag is and what a text center is. Now, obviously, you should know by looking at this that there was Bootstrap included in this project, and that was just basically to ensure that the styling is fast and doesn't take time. So it's the text is obviously centered and all that. Now we have the first input tag here. Now, this input tag is where we type in our task. You could see it's made up of about four attributes that we could count here. First of all, the type, which is a regular HTML attribute, just to tell us that the type of input here is a text. Now, this v model is it's called a directive, a view directive. The job of a V model is to attach or connect or synchronize this particular element, the value that is supposed to be here, with a data in our script. Now, that data is the data that is found inside this options API here. Now, let's look at that. That is this task. So that element is now connected to this, is synchronized to this. So whatever changes that occurs this within that element is going to affect this data directly. Now, I hope that makes it's clear enough. So this input practically means that when I type anything inside here, it connects it straight to the data within our options API, which is labeled as tags. So if I say I am a boy, it has linked up this value now. This is a string value now that has basically been linked to that task. Uh, let's keep going so that we make out more sense out of it. Now, beneath the input tag, which is this. Now, the way it's arranged, this is just a single tag. It's not like they are separate. It's just arranged for it to be readable. So this could be in a straight line, obviously, because it's like a regular HTML tag, just like this. So the next thing beneath it is the button tag. Now this button tag has a regular tag for it has a regular class that is used in styling it, of course, from the Bootstrap library, and then it has an event. Now this is a view event. A view event is declared using the @ symbol and then the kind of event. Now, when if you want to know the kind of events that are available within Vue, you can obviously check the documentation and you see a couple of them. Let me see if we could quickly go through that and see some other examples of events that they have. Uh, let's check their documentation. So you can see events here. Let me see if there's a list somewhere here that we could check. So, but basically, you could see them explaining it. This is an example at click, at increase by is another event, and in their proper documentation for the events, which if I don't see it now, I don't think I want to spend too much time looking for it. Probably we could send you a link to that later. But you would see a list of all possible events that you could have. And okay, sorry. You can see a list of all of them, and you could basically make use of any of them. But in this case, we are using a click event, and a click event obviously means when you click the mouse. Where was that? It should be here. Okay, so this is the button that is linked with the click event, and the moment I click it, it's supposed to perform a series of action. And in this case, it just added this I am a boy to the list of tasks that we need to do. So I will go back to the code base now. Now we also have a table that was declared, and this table is basically just organized to display first of all the list of the structure, the shape, which is the heading. This is the tax, this is the status, and these two hash for the buttons that are here. That is the table head, and then the table body. You could now see that we are using a v-for directive here. What this v-for is basically supposed to do. Now the tax that we formerly had declared inside data is basically an array of data. It's an array of string. You can see this is the tax that we are imputing, and then there's a tax variable declared that is an array of strings. The initial set of data that we saw before, this is it here. That's why when we initially load up the app, we see three data here. Let me refresh it. You could see that it is three data here already, because it is directly or hard coded into the code base directly here. Now, what happens is that when we type a value into this place and submit it, it takes that value and puts it here, and you would see that from the function. So let's see that submitted function. If you see the submitted tax function, you can see that it first of all checks the length of the task to see if there is a value imputed into it. Now, if it is empty, it returns just like that. But if it is not empty, it goes on to execute the next line of code. If it is not edited, then what it does is basically it imputes the tags that we just called here into the tags array. Do you get? And when it is imputed there, okay, sorry, this is checking if it needs to be edited. This is the one that is just pushing that tags into the tags array. You know, there's tags and there's tags. That is multiple tags, which is the array. So the tags that is received is pushed into the tags array, and then that tags array, based on our logic here, is pushed to the table, or is rendered on the table, which is right here. Sorry. Um, yeah. So you could see the tag status here, and you could see this is the array that is taking the task status. This is the loop that is running through the entire task. This is the array that is pushing out the name of the task, the object that is pushing out the name of the task. So all of this is used to just basically render it into what we see here. I don't know if I was able to break it down at all to your understanding. If there are any specific questions, probably that will help. Hello, Amaka.
Hello.
Is
So you
anyone
need
there?
more? Yeah, I'm here. I can hear you, Bobby.
Okay. So I don't
Okay,
know
so
how.
let's just put this up here. Sorry, let me put this now. Can you see
Okay,
the
so
question on the screen?
yeah, Vue is a framework that is I would say its implementation is quite different from the way React is. So React is more or less regarded as a library most times, because it is not structured in a framework pattern. Now, you could see the way Vue was able to arrange this. You have your templates, you have your script, and all of that in a specific structure that helps you, that guides the way you implement things. So, uh, let's say Vue is more structured than React, but in terms of their purpose, they are designed basically for the front end, and they are used for designing front end applications. And a lot of the principles, or a lot of the concepts that Vue tries to achieve, React also tries to achieve that in terms of reactivity, handling of events, saving states, and so on and so forth. They have it, but they are implemented in their own separate ways. Vue is more structured, and that is why people would advise that you learn Vue when you want to start developing in a JavaScript front end framework, than they would advise you to go for React, because Vue, because of the fact that it is structured, it is easier to learn than React. React is I would say it is less structured, is less rigid than Vue. But generally speaking, they are both front end frameworks and would help you build beautiful stuffs on the front end. I think React is a little bit more flexible, which is why I would say it is quite popular. And there are certain people who tend to enjoy using it over Vue. But generally speaking, they are beautiful in their own way. And what Vue would achieve for you, React will probably do the same thing, and vice versa. Start the last question, Amaka. Are there more questions?
There are more questions. It's on your screen.
Aside documentation, what other resources can you recommend to learn Vue? So, obviously, the documentations would be the first go-to place. Then, obviously, there are classes you could take online, some of which could come from master classes such as those that are held by Techie's Garage. You could also want to learn specific concepts, and you would see a lot of resources on YouTube. But like I would always say, the difference between learning from an organized tutorship environments such as Techie's Garage or Udemy or what are those other ones? Uh, the difference between that and going to learn from platforms like YouTube and generally surfing the web is that those guys already have their materials properly structured in such a way that it is broken down for people to learn gradually. But going to YouTube, you need to get a clear picture of what you are searching for so that you can gradually source the information piece by piece and puzzle them together by yourself. So if you are up for the adventure, definitely all those resources are available online. View has quite the community, and there are definitely materials that are everywhere online that you could learn from. If you combine that with the documentation, and I'm pretty sure you are good. Or you could also sign up for a couple of these classes online, all these master classes or regular classes on platforms like Udemy or Techie's Garage, and you'll be able to achieve a lot of this under your own self-paced speed. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question though. Okay. So what level of JavaScript do you need to have gotten? So you just need to know the basics of JavaScript. You need to understand, the basics of how functions work, how you should be able to know a bit about synchronous and asynchronous programming in their own separate entities. And when you're able to learn basically your data types, your functions, your asynchronous programming, I think you can dive straight into this. You also need to understand it in relations to the front end, because there are two aspects to JavaScript: the back end and the front end. So you need to learn JavaScript in relations to the front end. That would mean you need to understand what the document object model is and how it interacts with JavaScript basically at a basic level before you dive into Vue, because a lot of what you would see in your regular vanilla JS and your regular HTML and CSS is what you would come and see here in a much more structured and organized form, with a little bit of their additions here and there. So definitely you need your foundational knowledge on JavaScript. You don't need to be an expert building AI tools or whatsoever using JavaScript. You just need to have the foundational knowledge of how those things work, and then you'll be able to use it alongside in Vue. Any more questions? Oh, definitely. I would make the code base available so that it could be used. I would send it to the organizers, and I'm pretty sure they'll be able to put it on the platform the best way possible. So do you need to create HTML and CSS and JS templates, then start changing things for the implementation? Now, in most cases, for the purpose of ease, is usually better. Like I do that. I first of all create my HTML and CSS templates, not necessarily the JavaScript templates, but I create my HTML and CSS, and then I transfer it into the Vue framework. It's usually comfortable and easier for me to do like that. But there are people who go directly into the Vue environment and just start writing everything there. Obviously, the first one, or the one in which I'm used to doing, has a lot of advantages it poses to me, because when I have implemented it as a basic template as HTML and CSS, I'm able to see it work plainly in my browser and make all the necessary changes. And by the time I'm moving it into my framework, and by doing that most times, I'm already visualizing how I want to cut out certain things as components and all that. It basically helps me plan my implementation. I'll be able to know, okay, these buttons are much more similar. Okay, I would probably make this a template and include it as a component. I'll probably make it a component and include it into, other bigger components rather than, directly fuse it into a specific component. So basically what I'm trying to say in essence is you implementing your HTML and CSS first will first of all give you the ability to visualize it properly and know how you break it down into your framework implementation. So yes, implementing it as HTML and CSS plainly first is 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 a reasonable approach to take. But obviously, there are still people who would just rather go straight into it. But I would advise that you use that approach. It's not a bad thing to do. It's quite helpful. Any more questions about that? So you said in view, uh, how uh, I can just map out the whole project will be how the whole project will be, and then begin to add the view processes. Yes, it's basically what the previous person asked. It's basically building out the templates. Now, when you're building out, obviously, the process towards building a project starts with your UI UX design, right? Now, the UI UX person gives you his design, and you look at this design, you are supposed to convert that into probably a front end framework just like Vue. What I do, the process I do is I look at that UI UX design and I convert it into HTML and CSS codes first. Now, when I do that, I would have structured out, okay, in my head, a navigation bar is used on multiple pages, so I can make that a single component. Instead of me rewriting that as in each of the templates, I'm going to only write it once as a component and import it into any templates that I need to use. You understand? Um, then I would say, okay, there are buttons that are within these projects. These buttons all have the same shape and size. Probably the only difference is its colors. I would tell myself, okay, I would implement those buttons as a component and I will import it anywhere that I need to use it. And then I will give it the necessary properties. And those properties will probably be things like the color and the text on it. Every other thing will be fundamentally the same. I will talk about what else. The footer. The footer is used in all pages on the web page. So I don't need to rewrite the footer in each of those pages one after the other. I can rewrite it as a single component and bring it into each of my page one after the other, which will be bigger components in their own self. And I don't need to write the footer multiple times as a result. So that's just basically what I'm trying to say. By the time you've implemented this and you've built it out in your HTML and CSS pattern, all you'll just be doing at that point is, okay, let's create a navigation component, and you just copy your HTML code and paste it there. You copy your CSS and paste it there. And if there's any JavaScript that needs to be done, you know the functionalities that you're trying to implement. You write it down in your options form or in your compositions form, and that component is good to go. You do that for as much components as it entails for the project, and before you know, you are done. And the importance of that is that you are structured in a very good way. If there's any need to make changes afterwards, you can either look at your templates, make an experiment change to it, see how it comes out on the general output, and make add those changes into your actual design. And it's a good flow from there.
Okay, so thank you very much, Bobby. That was the last question we had. So,
Okay.
guys, I believe you've learned a lot from Bobby. You learned a lot in the morning and this evening as well. If you have any more questions and you feel Bobby would have to answer, you can drop it on the Discord server. Bobby is present on the Discord server and will be available to answer your questions. Remember to join your Q&A session tomorrow by 9 p.m. So, Bobby, thank you so much for tonight's class. We really appreciate your presence. And also, if you're okay, Bobby, are you saying something?
Oh, no, no, no. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. So, also, if you are yet to follow us on Twitch, please go ahead to follow us on Twitch and subscribe to our YouTube channel. So, thank you guys. That will be all for tonight. Bye, everyone. See you next time.